This podcast is brought to you by PodSpot Events.
Hi everyone and welcome to Able Pod.
Therapy can look just like what you do every day. It's teaching life skills with support and then really being encouraging and reinforcing.
This ASD thing, it's not going to go away. It's 35% of the NDIS. It's incredible. It's the largest sector. It's something that we need to focus on more.
I'll do anything that I can do to get children to communicate effectively so they can access anything that they want in this world. I'm getting emotional now. I had no intention of getting emotional. A diagnosis is not so relevant to start off with. What your child's needs are is a lot more important. Seeing children communicate effectively and accessing the things that they want that make them happy in an environment that is suited for them, and then also in the bigger world, that's half the battle. So when children, if they do not have vocal verbal language by the age of 7, 8, they can get maybe some vocal language, but it's very rare.
One of your huge takeaways, I can tell, is that if you suspect something, take action.
Start early.
Well, hi everyone, and thanks for tuning in once again to Able Pod, the podcast channel on behalf of Able Plus. If you haven't heard of us before, we do disability and aged care networking events all around Australia. So there's every chance that we're coming to a town near you with 80 plus events on the calendar in 2025. Also, we're going to start doing some workshops, so keep an eye out for those. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to have Dianne Verstappen with me. Welcome to the channel.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Much appreciated.
You're so welcome. I can't wait to have a talk with you, get access to your story. You are the CEO of Aspire Early Intervention. I did have a look on your LinkedIn profile and do a little bit of research, and you've been doing this job for a long time. How many years have you been doing this for?
Aspire exists 17 and a half years, but working with children I've done since I was 18. So that's even longer than that, but I won't tell you the exact time.
My maths isn't that good. You're probably going to be safe with me. Okay, so of all the things you could get involved in, why working with kids? Why ASD in particular? Give us the backstory. Why so much time, so much of your life spent in this space?
Yes, look, I love children. I'd like to, even when I was young in my late teens, and you start off babysitting and you really connect with children, and then you sort of establish that relationship. And I loved seeing how children can learn. So I've always been interested. Started off with a teaching degree, specializing in physical education. Then did a pediatric physiotherapist degree. Came to Australia, sort of rolled into this field because it takes a little bit of time to get started. So became a registered physiotherapist here, but then started working accidentally, just a little advertisement in a newspaper, working with children with autism, because before it was predominantly children with physical disabilities. And then I started with this little girl, and I just fell in love with teaching and using a one-on-one teaching, and then specifically across all developmental domains. So teaching language, social skills, and really taking the environment into account. So did that for a little bit, then was invited by the Center for Autism and Related Disorders in the US, went to the US, did my formal training, did many more trainings, but I then after a little while ended up starting my business, Aspire Early Intervention, and just continued to, I guess, work and roll from there, and really supporting families, and especially very, very young children before they become verbal. I love seeing, what popped in my head, it's a really nice memory, and it's probably the most important reason. So I didn't start off sort of as a speech pathologist, but I started as a physiotherapist. So when I started working with this little girl, it was a 2.5-year-old little girl.
Can you remember her name?
Yes. I can remember. I remember I can picture the exact moment. So we started working with her.
This is a big moment for you.
This is because this little girl. I'm getting emotional now. I had no intention.
Coming up.
I had no intention of getting emotional. But this little girl.
It's allowed on the podcast,
okay.
Right?
So I started with this little girl, and we started. So she was totally mute, made not a single sound. And we started off teaching her some imitation. And I'm going, what if I do this? Remember, I had no previous experience with children with an autism spectrum disorder, just children and young people with motor disorders. And I thought, she just started to imitate. And I thought, what if I do this? Do this. And then I clapped my hands and she copied that. And I said, do this. And then I knocked on the table and she did that. And I said, do this. And I waved and she waved. And I said, do this. And she did it.
Oh my God.
And that was so powerful because her parents and I never had heard her voice because she would only grunt, scream, cry. And then I did all the other sounds and she got it immediately. So I called, very emotional now. I got the mum into the room because she was...
She'd never heard her daughter.
Never heard
her true voice.
No. And so then I was able to demonstrate in a very sunny room. She came in and I did it again and she did it. And then I started doing words. So literally within the space of an hour, I had her imitate words. And then her talking started. And to cut then a long story short, I then continued working with her for 3.5, 4 years. And she just got married this year.
Wow.
Yep, as a job as a teacher. And so she was diagnosed with severe ASD at the time. Yeah. And we were able to teach her all these skills across all developmental domains. So she is, one of the main reasons why I love what I do and I can see the potential. Now, that story or that progress is not always possible for a variety of reasons. But every child that I see for the first time and an intake, that's what I'm looking for that possibility in teaching young children because it can be there. And I'll do anything that I can do to get children to communicate effectively so they can access anything that they want in this world, job, toys. If they can't communicate or if they don't know they have access to that, it limits many things ongoing in their life. So catching them or getting them when they're very young and then the ability to teach how does a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, how can they communicate their needs and wants in our world, and how can we adapt our world so to suit their needs?
Yeah, sure.
But how can we teach them so they can get their needs met? That is at the forefront of what we do and what I believe is very important.
I feel really privileged to have access to a very strong emotional driver for you. And sort of a foundation stone in your business, I can tell this girl imprinted heavily on you.
Yes.
And I would suggest at that time, this is pre-NDIS. This is so early. You went to the States to get some understanding of what was happening in this sector, right? Mm-hmm. And this is a completely different landscape. And people that are listening to this podcast, most of them won't be able to relate to it. Give us an idea as to some of the barriers that you're up against during that time. Why did you go offshore in order to come back? And how pioneering were you in unlocking these kids? That's what really intrigues me. So
you have to keep in mind, I've always wanted to be a pediatric physiotherapist. So when this company, the card, offered me a job, I said, no. I'm a pediatric physiotherapist. Yeah. So I really, and they said, but Dianne, we can, we'd love to train you. Yeah. And so they invited me to come over for 6 months, I think at the time. Yeah. And they trained me, paid for all my expenses and then sent me back and said, okay, now do your work here in Sydney because there were very, very few practitioners who were doing that. I think at the time I was one of the first maybe 8 or 10 practitioners in the whole of New South Wales who were doing this kind of work.
Okay, so that helps give some context to the infancy of this whole space, 8 to 10 in New South Wales. Yeah. Can you imagine the demand if it was realised? Yeah. If people went through an intervention specialist to get a diagnosis, can you imagine 8 to 10 is a drop in the ocean?
Yeah, that's right. I still remember those early days.
They were the lucky ones, Dianne.
Well, or not, because I remember there was no funding. Everything had to be paid out of pocket. That was before HACWA funding, which is now obsolete. But there was no funding at all. So it was purely privately funded. Yeah. And this little girl, to put into context, with her for at least for the first 2.5 years, we did 30 hours a week of early intervention with her.
You did 30 a week?
30, and I probably did 22 of those for the first 2.5, 3 years. Yeah.
I've never heard of such an intensive program.
Yeah, and so it's very play-based, based around reinforcement, because children don't learn if they don't enjoy learning. You can't force children to learn.
She became a part of your life, this kid.
Yeah, I'm still in touch with the family, and yeah, I'm very proud of what she has achieved. And remember, she's not the only one, but she's the reason that I fell in love with what I do. And I just wish all children who have those kind of difficulties and learning difficulties, I'd like to make their life easier. And again, when I first see a child or do an intake meeting, that's what I like to see. What is possible and how can I get that out there? Because often parents come to me and they sort of, NDIS is hard work, going through the process, getting a diagnosis, not really knowing, does my child have ASD? Do they have something else? Mm-hmm. Do I need to give them a label? I don't want my child to have a label. Mm-hmm. What about the future? And so
all of that plays on their mind massively. And it's a new
it's very
sector.
Stressful.
It's incredibly stressful.
You're
often coming to terms with your own take on this diagnosis.
Yeah.
And that takes time to process. And often, I don't know about you, you will have a lot more context around this, but often it won't be the parent that'll see it because they're living too close with it. It'll be a friend or a family friend that says, hey, have you ever thought about having them checked out for ASD?
Yeah.
And the immediate idea is to push back, of course.
Yeah.
Nah, don't be silly.
Yeah, and it's working together with parents collaboratively. And for us as clinicians, for me, a diagnosis is not relevant because, and you have heard this many times before, once you see one child with a diagnosis, you've seen one child with a diagnosis. I'd really like to look at individual families in the context of their home, their family members, their preschool, their extended family, their interests, and that's what we do. We do an ecological and environmental assessment and then say, okay, what are your values as a family, cultural values, language, and then we sit down with the family and say, okay, how can we set these goals then across all developmental domains? And it's not that we just teach language, it's more that we like to teach children, how do we learn in this environment? How can parents, schools adapt the environment so we can enhance and speed up learning? So that's what we do. But then also what's the best way to then teach children how to learn language, play skills, social skills, so they can access what they want, autonomy and choice and controlling your environment. That should be the key thing for all children, regardless of whether they have a diagnosis or no diagnosis or a delay. You want children to be happy. Being able to control your environment, communicate your needs and your wants, and have access to the things that you want, that's what makes people happy.
It's an interesting dynamic that you've suggested. You're essentially retrofitting the norm for somebody to make their environment more suited to their characteristics, right?
Yeah.
Now, that is not the way I grew up.
No.
The norm was the school. If you had any needs or criteria outside of that, that was not part of whatever the system was.
No.
So now you're trying to go back into that system and say, hey, these kids would really feel more comfortable if this was part of the system.
Yes.
So you're pushing back into
it's
a system that's been in place for a
both.
long time.
Yeah, but it's really both. It's the environment working together with the children and their capacity for learning. But at the end of the day, a shop is still a shop. You still have to be able to pay with money. So you do have to.
So you're a realist in this.
Yeah, you have to do both. We can adapt the environment to suit a child's needs, but also we have to teach a child to live in the environment that is going to be there. So it's really what works for the child. And then some children, as they get older, they will always need adaptations and support.
Yeah.
And so how can we push that collaboration between the environment and the child's individuality, and how can we then work together with families to tie it in with their cultural values and what they would like for their child?
Yeah.
That's how we then program and work with them. That's how I like to work.
Yeah. You're not into algorithms. You're not into modeling. You're into one. This is what I can do with the one, and I'm gonna have a look back here. I'm gonna dig through the family. I'm gonna see the opportunities, and I'm gonna see that this child has a real opportunity to move forward. We can change the trajectory from here because I know all of this.
Yeah,
that's quite rare, Dianne.
Yeah, is it?
I believe so. I believe that most of these kids come into a model and they just go through the process.
Yeah, we'd love to adapt our First Steps model is really geared to support families and meet them where they are, and looking at the capacity for each, what each child can learn. And sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's fast. It really, really depends.
So tell me this, somewhere out there listening to this podcast, there will be a parent.
Yep.
And they'll have a child that'll be aged somewhere around 3, 4, and in a social setting it'll be somewhat aloof and disengaged. Speech will certainly be delayed if there's anything at all. Quite happy playing by itself, probably doesn't like loud noises. There's a couple of things, and someone said something at a party one time, you ever thought about having Johnny checked out for ASD? You dismissed it immediately. What does that journey look like for somebody who's listening to that? What does that journey look like from there to coming to see someone like you, to then going on a journey towards unlocking them, changing their life, having a full, whole, great life? What does that look like?
I think, and this is from my experience working with very young children, but also having worked with adolescents and adults, if I'd rather do too much in the beginning and making sure there is a jumping off point rather than waiting. When I talk to families initially, should I come in and should I start services? When your child is 2.5 years old, but some of the skills are sitting around the 18-month level or 12-month level, so non-verbal, limited communication, maybe some interest in toys, but at 2.5 you have, brief sentences.
Dianne, you're a specialist in this. The average parent has no idea that at 2.5 they should be, they've got a child that's in that 18-month level, right? You live, eat and breathe this, but mum in the back of whatever is just, she may think something's up.
So if there are concerns, there are some checklists that you can do. Preschools, they tend to do them, but if people flag concerns, we have a free checklist on our website if you want to put it up.
Yeah.
You can do that checklist.
Yeah,
but
let's
also
get that up.
It's also just a checklist.
Yeah.
But if there are concerns, start doing some work, start educating yourself. A diagnosis is not so relevant to start off with, but the understanding what your child's needs are is a lot more important now. When it comes to funding and NDIS access, that's when your diagnosis becomes more and more relevant. But there are many parent resources available that are free. It's really educating yourself as a parent. Hey, I have some concerns. Should my child be doing this? Should my child be, jumping with 2 feet off the ground? Should they be holding a pen or a pencil? Should they be putting 2 words together? Should they point and look back at you? If you have concerns, educate yourself. Knowledge is power. And again, you don't have to do anything, but you can start tracking some of these things, and you say, and it's not so much where your child is now, it's actually the trajectory over 3 or 6 months. If they're learning, and they're learning at a reasonable pace, because the average learning pace or the average, skill building, that varies per child. The developmental trajectory varies per child. But it's being aware, being an involved parent, and that there are many checklists. Check it. If you have concern, we'll start doing some one-on-one work with your child with some, we have probably some handouts on our website. But then if you have more ongoing concerns, or you do the checklist and say, I should get a more formalized assessment, go and do that, but then don't wait. We see children sometimes, especially after or during COVID and sort of at the tail end of COVID, late last year. My child wasn't talking at 2.5 and had limited interest, but my GP said just wait because he's a boy. I've been doing some speech sessions, and she said, no, probably not an ASD diagnosis. And I couldn't find another provider. NDIS was slow. I didn't really want to go onto the NDIS. But then the child comes to me at 5.
Yeah.
And the delay is still 2.5, 3 years. Now, because children learn in a different way, we have to figure out how they learn. We now not only have to try and catch them up is maybe not the wrong word, but now we're sort of running out of time for...
Why? Because the door's closing.
So when children, if they do not have verbal language by the age of 7, 8, they can get maybe some vocal language, but it's very rare. It becomes
7, 8.
it becomes it's a crucial language. It doesn't mean they don't learn how to communicate, but that it's the research says and that the children are far less likely to become fluent vocal verbal communication, and that means that it closes a lot of doors for communicating, in the outside world.
Yeah.
So then other people have to adjust, which we can do.
Yeah.
But realistically, it becomes, it's much harder. If you can't communicate your needs and you have to go to Prologue or to Go, which is an AAC, alternative communication, or PECS, or you need to do sign, you can, but not everyone will know how to do that. So we'd love to teach that language early.
One of your huge takeaways, I can tell, is if you suspect something, take action. Is that it? Do it.
That's it. Start early.
And you're suggesting that maybe the GP doesn't know best. You're even suggesting that maybe the local speechy hasn't picked up the ASD markers because they're. You want to see them. You want to get them in and have an assessment.
It's not that GPs don't know. GPs don't have much training on child development because often they're just a referral source. They refer to other specialists.
They have to see a certain number of clients per day.
That's right.
And they have a 6-minute interval. I know we had a doctor on the thing. He told me what it's like to be a GP.
Yeah, it's
every 6 minutes you need to be turning over a client. Tell me what you need to know. I have 6 minutes to fix you. See you later.
So they need to then write a referral letter to a speech pathologist, for example. So that time they're not diagnosticians. I'm not a diagnostician either, but I've done this for a very long time. Now, speech pathologists, on the other hand, they're very well trained, so they can spot. But also sometimes they'll say, "Oh, wait," or there's like a long waiting list for speech pathologists. If families do not have necessarily funding. So by the time people get into a speech pathology session or 5 sessions, which is what only covered under Medicare is 5 sessions, that can be another 6 or 8 months. And then you have 5 sessions, then you need to apply to NDIS, or you need to go to a pediatric specialist or a diagnostician for a diagnosis. By then we're 12, 14 months further. And if the parents then don't have understanding or training or coaching on how can I teach my child to talk, or how can I teach my child to communicate? How do I teach my child to increase interest in toys, or how do I manage, meltdowns, or how do I manage when they get upset? Then we can do things in that time. And then sometimes we don't need to do intensive intervention. I don't want to do intensive intervention.
Have you ever done 30 hours since this initial girl? Have you ever done that much intervention?
We've done intensive intervention, with many children.
Wow.
We don't get that much funding at the moment. We still did it about 2 or 3 years ago. Because we offer it at home and in the preschool. So what families do, they see allied health assistants or behaviour technicians working with the child, because it's opportunity, looking at play opportunities, teaching opportunities, language opportunities, making cookies together, because parents are tired. Parents can't do it all. And so seeing an allied health clinician or a technician or an assistant working with your child one-on-one, it's just sitting next to the child and watching something together or reading a book together. Therapy can look just like what you do every day. Like pouring the child wants some milk. We can practice the word milk. You pulling the fridge open. Can you find a cup?
Is that all good therapy, is it?
That's all therapy. It's teaching life skills with support, and then really being encouraging and reinforcing, hey, you want milk? Guess what? Now you can ask for milk, or you can pour your own milk.
Yeah.
Because parents, they need to cook dinner, or they need to go pick up other children, or they're not.
They're exhausted.
So
they're absolutely exhausted.
So that's why we love doing that therapy in home, because parents can see it and they're able then to follow through after that. And then we also have clinicians in clinic. We have a preschool program, so we also then do, after we do some of that parent coaching, we can also have children in our clinic, because some children, childcares or preschools, they find it very difficult to manage when children are nonverbal and they may have behaviours that are challenging. So we then work in our clinic where we can support the environment a lot more so children can participate, because that one particular toy that should be accessible to other children, well, we might save that for that one particular child. We can manage expectations because it's one-on-one. It's not one-on-one, but it's in a small group setting where we can manipulate the environment so children, are set up for success. We like children to succeed and learn. Yeah.
I think we all like that. I'm intrigued by the early journey, right? What unfolds after that can be the magic. So you book a initial assessment.
Mm-hmm.
As a parent, you're anxious. You're still coming to terms with it yourself. Can you walk us through the day? What does that look like? What do you do with this? And what's the average age of an initial assessment?
Like young. Yeah.
I know the power of prevention versus paying an NDIS plan later on, right? I'm a huge advocate, and I've spoken about this whenever I get the opportunity. I love telling good stories about the NDIS as well. But so let's go back. We're starting a journey, and you've already put your hand up and say, "Come see me as early as you can." If you even think or suspect something,
just have a chat.
As a parent, that alleviates guilt. By the way, you're like, "Well, I did what I could as soon as I could. I didn't wait till they were 5."
Yeah. And we can hold your hand. That's really what our First Steps program is designed to do.
Yeah.
So after the intake meeting, and you say, yes, let's get started, we then do one-on-one with families. So if I'm your clinician and you're my parents, you come to the clinic, and then we say, what areas would you like to work on? And they might say language, social skills. We might also say, we can also support you. Some challenging behaviors, some behaviors of concern or barriers to learning. I find it very difficult to go out to the park with my child. My child loves going to the park, but we can't get them back home. Okay, so let's work on those specific, very useful targets that you can do every day. So what we'll then do is we put a program together for that particular skill. We look at as a parent, what has been working, what hasn't been working. Then we say, okay, this hasn't been working. What if we did X, Y, Z? What if we, didn't go to the park in the morning, but in the afternoon, or vice versa? What if we showed some visuals, and because child doesn't want to put on their shoes, maybe if we give a choice between 2 pairs of shoes, or so we look at what will work. What's the outcome? We like children to be happy. We like them to give a choice, but at the end of the day, after an hour at the park, they still have to come home. So we then demonstrate, we explain it. Yes, the parent says, yes, I think I can do this. We then demonstrate that skill. We then say that to the parent, okay, let's practice it together while we're in the clinic or in the community, like in the park. The parent does something and they sort of, they have questions or they're concerned. It's okay, let's do it again, but now try this, or do this faster, or let's use this visual, or don't talk so much, or, just wait. You don't have to be reactive. You can just take a breath. It's okay. Hold your child's hand. You don't need to say something. And then they do it again. We say, great. Now, for the next week, can you practice these skills? You can videotape it, you can make some notes, whatever works for the family. And then during the week when they submit video, or and sometimes we also have additional sessions with a clinician, either in the home or in the clinic. So we also work on the same skill, but the clinician does it. So it strengthens that process. We then sit down together, next session, we say, hey, this went well. How did you go? The parent goes, great, or I have a couple of questions. Then that gets added to the next homework the next week. So at the end of the 12 weeks...
You're building a circle of support, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just the 3-4 hours that mum and dad can afford. It's that plus the 30 they're putting in.
Well, if there's funding. So usually families do not have the funding initially to get started. So we start with the parent coaching. If there's some additional funding, we can then do some one-on-one, but then we can support the family through the NDIS, even though that's been harder and harder to get more intensive support, especially if we can demonstrate good outcomes. If families do their homework, or, we can get children to communicate better, or a reduction in, or increasing going to the park. So whatever their goals are in their NDIS plan, then we can go to the NDIS and then support them if necessary through the tribunal and say, hey, this is what works, this is clinically indicated, let's do this together. And then families, and we can then support that from a clinical perspective. And then we might say, you could also contact an NDIS, an advocate. This is the process, because families also don't understand the bureaucracy or the documentation that's required. So as part of our parent coaching, we also support families through that. It's the understanding of that process, but that's just recent with the NDIS. I didn't do that 15, 20 years ago.
You were very pioneering.
I was just on the floor with children and families. I do still some of that, but very little.
Yeah. Give us an idea. How many in your team now?
We have, I think, 40 something all up.
Really?
A clinic in Deakin, a clinic in Liverpool.
Wow.
I have a clinic in Newington.
Yeah.
And we have 10, 12 senior clinicians, and then we call them behaviour support practitioners, but they're really early intervention specialists. So they don't necessarily do, because we work with such young children, so they predominantly do the early intervention and work predominantly on skill building.
Wow.
Across the developmental domains.
That's an incredible contribution that you're making across those clinicians when you think about the number of kids that have come through your care, received a diagnosis and gone out on this journey of learning, right?
Yeah.
I think it's fantastic. I mean, you've been doing this for 18 years. Are you still enjoying it? Have you still got energy in the tank? What's next for you? You're obviously at a stage in your business life where you can probably go out and do whatever you wanted. Mm-hmm. You've built a great brand. You're incredibly well respected in the sector.
Thank you.
What's the future look like?
So we just recently partnered with HHG. Mm-hmm. So Humanity Health Group, they do also because one of the things that I've always found difficult is we do that early intervention, and then at 10, 12, where do they go? We haven't had luck in hiring an OT or speech pathologist or a psychologist. Mm-hmm. So last year we partnered with Humanity Health Group because we wanted to encompass the bigger package and all needs, and work comprehensively with additional clinicians. So that partnership has given us the opportunity to really support parents even more.
There's at least two disciplines required, right? Or two what are they called? Two clinicians. You're going to need a speechy, you're going to need OT, and then you may need a third in terms of behaviour or something like that. Is that the bundle?
It depends. It depends a lot on the availability of funding. We love working together with allied health clinicians because, as I said before, while we work on speech-language communication, play skills or motor skills, what we really do is we work on the learning to learn part in the environment. Mm-hmm. A speech pathologist is still the expert in teaching communication. So we work together generally with the speech pathologist and really support families in that sense. Yeah. So we teach the parent how to support the child, but we often use techniques from speech pathologists to work together, or the speech pathologist does a standardized language assessment that we then derive that information from, and then we work on building that skill set. But there's no one requirement. You can just work with an OT if you wish. Mm-hmm. You can work with us across the developmental domains with a allied health assistant, behaviour technician, and one of our program supervisors. But then we love working together with OTs. It's just OTs particularly is difficult to find. Mm. And then also we generally work together with speech pathologists.
Look, I think it's great that you've partnered with a larger sort of umbrella organisation, and I know them well, and they are excellent. Yeah. So congratulations.
Thank you.
On that. This ASD thing, it's not going to go away. It's 35% of the NDIS. It's incredible. It's the largest sector, and it's growing. It's growing in youth. Yeah, it's something that we need to focus on more. Get better at. We need you. We need more of you. We need you in every state. We need you in regional areas. Regional areas are crying out for speeches and OTs. We know we do events there. There's no one there. Yeah. There's wait lists. Break your heart.
In my ideal scenario, I'd love to go into daycares and preschools and use those facilities to support families in there, either a separate room or to work in the clinic, in the room space, and really have the allied health technicians, because they can be at home, but they can also support in the preschool. We do some of that, but I'd love to do more.
You want more access at the daycare level,
and working together with the teachers and the preschool educators. I'd love that. That's sort of my next big thing, where I'd really like to work together with daycares and train educators, because they are experts in their fields, but they don't necessarily have expertise in children with ASD or those specific techniques that we use. In the same way that we train parents, there's no reason that we can't teach.
This is a good undertaking. This is a good. I know. This is a good stamp to put on that space.
I'd love to. That's really I think the next big thing, having that collaborative partnerships with preschools.
If anyone's going to do it, I reckon you can. I reckon you can crack the code.
I'd love to.
You can get access to some of these daycare centres and have specialist ASD wings, opportunities, rooms, function centres, whatever. It's good.
Yeah, I'd love to. Needs to be funding available, preschools and daycares, or the executive teams.
It's a big piece.
It is a big piece. So it's really the communication. How can we do that best? But I'm open. If you have any ideas, I'm open. Or if the listeners have any ideas, or I'd love to talk.
I think it starts with talking, and you're at a stage in your career when you can progress these things, and you've got the power of that brand that you've partnered with behind you. So anything's possible. I want to go back to the girl, 30 hours. Yes. Did you see photos of the wedding?
I did see photos of the wedding, and she looks absolutely happy and lovely. Yeah, it was lovely. I'm so happy that I got to actually. So rather than thinking about me helping her, she helped me, because thanks to her, I'm sitting here today.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it's true. If I hadn't met her, I don't know if I'd be sitting here today.
Do you think that you've woven some of the principles, some of the foundational learnings through your business that you had with her, and that perhaps you're going to impact a larger entity with some of that? Do you think that's part of your DNA, that early success?
Yeah, I think we talk about this with parents too, values as a family, but values as an individual. And for me as a clinician, if I can't live by my values, my actions don't matter. Like my actions need to match those values. So especially in my working career and my professional life, it's helping children achieve the best possible outcome long term. That's my value. So I'll do anything that I can. Otherwise, if I can't do that, or if I don't, I have to stop working. I have to find something else to do that's in line with that value. I'd love to see children, and I sort of said this at the beginning, seeing children communicate effectively and accessing the things that they want that make them happy in an environment that is suited for them, and then also in the bigger world, that's half the battle in my mind. And it's really, that's what I want for children, because I know that gives them best long-term outcome.
I love that. Dianne, you've been remarkable.
Thank
you so much for sharing your story and taking us on a journey through the early days and your business and ASD diagnosis and all of the gains that you've made. And on behalf of all the parents, for all the kids that come through your programs and head out into the world and you change their trajectory.
I'd love to. Yeah, that's the only thing I want to do, change the trajectory so they can live happy, fulfilled lives.
It comes through loud and clear.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no, it's good. And it's good for the soul. And this NDIS community likes uplifting stories, and you've given us one.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation too.
You're welcome. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you. On behalf of Able Pod, that has been Dianne from Aspire. Dianne, you've been a fantastic guest.
Thank you.
And that is Able Pod. Thanks very much for listening, guys.
Thank you.